What I'd like to address here in connection with that terrible horror that happened on August 6th in Hiroshima is one aspect of U.S. motivation, and has to do with our original sin as Americans. Started with what we did to Native Americans, of course. It's called racism. Uh, Specifically, it's called white superiority. Now, yesterday, the head of the National Security Council of Ukraine, which we support hook, line, and sinker, had this to say just yesterday. Russians are Asians. Therefore, they lack humanity. Here's exactly the quote. Russians are Asians. They have a completely different culture, a completely different vision. Our key difference from them is humanity, said Danilov, the head of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council. Huh? I would like to not fast forward, but fast backward about 45 years. Jose, if you're ready for that clip from General Westmoreland, who led our troops in Vietnam, the troops fighting against people they call gooks, who didn't look like us. And again, there was a tinge of racism throughout that war. No one said it quite eloquently as General Westmoreland did a couple of years after the war. Do you have that, Jose?
Many bombs, many coffins. These are for children. 800 or 900 a week. I have lost 7 children myself. Many have died here. Though it's nothing like in the countryside, many more have died there. In the countryside, there are no coffins. There's no money to buy them.
How did all the children die?
Poison. Poison, you know. These planes keep spouting and spraying the stuff, and so many people have died. It seems to destroy their intestines. With this spraying and bombing, so many have died. Each day, right on time, the bomb craters appear. Hundreds of tons are dropped each day. And we can't talk about it. We can't talk about it because we are afraid of the government.
It can be described much like a singer doing an aria, you know, that's totally into what he's doing, you know, totally feeling it. He knows the aria, and he's experiencing the aria, and he knows his limits, and he knows whether he's doing it and doing it well. Flying an aircraft can be a great deal like that.
What's a race driver feel like? When does a guy want to drive an Indianapolis 500 and go charging around there? I guess perhaps the risk of dying, being killed is part of it that makes it thrilling.
I can tell when the aircraft feels just right. I can tell when it's about to stall. I can tell when I can't pull another fraction of a pound, or the airplane will stall, flip out, and spin on you. I would follow a little pathway on something like a TV screen in front of me that would direct me right, left, or center. Follow the steering, keep the steering symbol centered. I'd see a little attack light when we stepped into attack. I could pull the commit switch on my stick, and the computer took over. Computer figured out the ballistics, the airspeed, the slant range, and dropped the bombs when we got to the appropriate point, in whichever kind of attack we'd selected, whether it be flying straight and level or tossing our bombs out. So it was very much of a technical expertise thing. I was a good pilot. You know, I had a lot of pride in my ability to fly.
Well, the Oriental doesn't put the same high price on life as does the Westerner. Life is plentiful, life is cheap in the Orient. And as the philosophy of the Orient expresses it, life is not important.
Or, am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can I be heard? Okay. Well, there you have Westmoreland. Westmoreland was from the great state of Georgia. So was Jimmy Burns, the Secretary of State, who was the single advisor to President Truman, himself a bigot. He would never refer to African Americans other than by using the N-word. He was the sole advisor that said, yeah, let's drop these atomic bombs on the Japanese. Now, MacArthur, Eisenhower, Leahy, all the 4 stars and the 5 stars said, don't do it. They had a conscience, okay? They were less motivated by other factors like racism, like white superiority, actually white supremacy. So what I'm saying here is that you have a bent in our leadership that sees white supremacy as embodied in NATO. I mean, look at NATO. What's the distinguishing characteristic of NATO? You got it. All white. Now, in the midst of the Vietnam fracas, there was a very poignant moment when Angela Davis, who had been protesting loudly and clearly, most people know that Angela Davis was African American. She was rounded up by the FBI. They got their girl, right? And they put her on the front page on the cover of Newsweek, okay? Shackled in chains. Now, at that particular time, James Baldwin, who was in France, wrote Angela Davis a very poignant letter. And I'm sorry to say that it still applies today. I'll read portions of it to you. The date was November 1970, so half century ago. Dear Sister Angela, I might have hoped by this hour that the very sight of chains on black flesh would be so intolerable a sight that the American people would spontaneously rise up and strike off the manacles. But now, more than ever, Americans appear to measure their safety in the chains and corpses of others. And so Newsweek has you on its cover, chained. Let me put it this way, says James Baldwin. As long as white Americans take refuge in their whiteness, they will allow millions of other people to be slaughtered. So long as their whiteness puts so sinister a distance between their own experience and the experience of others, they will never feel themselves sufficiently worthwhile to be responsible, to become responsible for themselves. Now, we do feel responsible sufficiently to change our fate and the fate of our children. We know that a person is not a thing and is not to be placed at the mercy of things. We know that air and water belong to all mankind and not merely the wealthy. Okay, 1970, guys, 53 years ago, air and water belong to all mankind and should be preserved. We know that a baby does not come into the world merely to be the instrument of someone else's profit. And finally, my dear sister Angela, some of us, white and black, know how great a price has already been paid to bring a new consciousness. If we know that, then we must fight for your life as though it were our own, which it is. We must render impassable with our own bodies the corridor to the gas chamber. For if they come for you in the morning, Sister Angela, they will be coming for us that night. Therefore, peace, Brother James. What I'm saying here is that from our earliest history as a country, we have seen this white superiority work its way into our consciousness. Is it still there? Of course it's still there. Listen to our approval for the kinds of things that the National Security Advisor in Ukraine says about Russians being Asians and therefore not really up to it, not really the same humanity, mind you, as we. Our President Biden betrayed his own version of this superiority. 8 days ago, he was in Maine. And after all the rhetoric and after all the speeches, he met at a private home. And this is a rendition of what he said. He said, Madeleine Albright had it right. We are the indispensable country. We are the exceptional country. He used the word essential. We are the essential nation, okay? And then he said this: what could possibly bring the world together? The President of the United States. Who could do it unless the President of the United States does it? What nation could do it? Now, the commentator, who's a very prominent American historian, a historian of America, like 19th century of America, but a very firmly rooted Democrat, she comments here, his vision reached back to the 1940s, to the post-war institutions that helped us rebuild Europe and create lasting alliances. Yeah, right. But his vision is out of date by at least 20 years, okay? Finally, what does he say? The whole world is changing, says Biden. But if we grab hold, there is nothing beyond our capacity. And the professor recording this comments, if I were writing a history of the Biden administration 150 years from now, I would call out this informal talk as the articulation of a vision of American leadership, period, end quote. So that's the vision. The vision is gone, folks. Without vision, the people perish. With this kind of vision, the people also perish. So what I'd like to say here is that when Hiroshima was allowed by President Truman and Secretary of State Billy Burns from Jimmy Burns from the state of South Carolina. Where was, did I say where General Westmoreland? Yeah, General Westmoreland from the state of South. Where is that fellow? What's his name? Lindsey Graham. He's from South Carolina. You know, there's something about, well, I know some of my best friends are from South Carolina, okay? But I like to end up with saying, look, whether it's the Yellow Peril, now very much at work with respect to China, whether it's the so-called gooks in South Vietnam, whether it's the camel jockeys, the towel heads, which our troops were taught to apply to the people in Iraq or Afghanistan, whatever it is, it's racism, pure and simple. It's white superiority. And I would just have to say that with respect to nuclear weapons, if this is the mindset on the part of the president, and he's already acquiesced in his military advisors telling him, oh, Mr. President, the Ukrainians are our best friend. They get the right ideas about, Asians and so forth, but they're out of ammunition. Instead of saying, you're fired, for God's sake, he says, oh, that's too bad. Let's give them some bars. And they said, well, sorry, Mr. President, we're kind of low. We're low on the ammunition anyway. Oh, my God. Well, we do have these cluster bombs here. Yeah, let's use the bombs. Yeah, but we know the Russians have more of them than when you're asking when we run out of. Well, then on the top shelf up here, we have under lock and key. Those are the tactical nukes. So we could use them. After all, we are superior. We have to work our will in this world. And if we grab hold, we certainly can. My God. Suffice it to say that with 6 decades of watching Russian leaders and U.S. leaders do this pas de Dieu, okay, I have never been so afraid that there will be a nuclear exchange which will not stop in Europe, but will do us all in. Meanwhile, let's say we avoid that. I say that we should pay attention to people like Rudyard Kipling, as well as James Baldwin and Angela Davis. Let me recite for you a short ditty from Rudyard Kipling, who talks about hustling the Asian brown. It is not wise for the Christian white to hustle the Asian brown, for the Christian riles and the Asian smiles, and he weareth the Christian down. At the end of the fight lies a tombstone white with the name of the late deceased, and the epitaph drear, a fool lies here who tried to hustle the East. My friends, we have to step up to our original sin of racism, of white superiority, and more specifically, supremacy. We have to get it through the heads of the white people who reign us and those who have been co-opted to join us from other races. And that the end is near unless we mend our ways and repent, repent of our sin of racism, and allow the free interchange of ideas. And that way, and only that way, can our leaders be brought to see that they have no other option than to, what you do first in first aid, for God's sake, you stop the bleeding. People being killed as we say these things. Stop the bleeding in Ukraine, have a ceasefire, go to negotiations, and work out a reasonable settlement where no one feels threatened in Central Europe, not the West and not the East. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Rain. Before we go to a couple of things we're going to ask you to respond to, could you say something about a matter that is regularly brought up every year when Hiroshima and Nagasaki come up, which is the so-called necessity for dropping the bomb? Why was the bomb dropped? Do you think it was necessary? And why do you think the people are still claiming one or the other?
Well, we were all taught in school, of course, that the reason the atomic bombs were dropped was so that we could save thousands of GIs from having to invade Japan. That was a lie. That was propaganda. We had broken the Japanese code. We knew exactly what they would settle for. All we had to do was promise them, okay, you keep your damn emperor if you need to. We won't kill him. We won't string him up. Keep him. He won't have any power, but you can keep him. Had we said that, the war would have been over. Okay? Now, Truman had this wonderful weapon. Japanese didn't look like us. Uh, how are you going to test this weapon and show the world how powerful the United States is? Okay. Well, you drop it, for God's sake. Do you drop it on an island like MacArthur and those, some sort of desolate island? No. You drop it on people. You kill a lot of people, okay? And that's precisely what Truman and Jimmy Burns authorized. And they had the same attitude as Westmoreland. Now, there was another element, of course. The Russians were coming in at the end of the war, and we were already preparing to sort of contend with the Russians instead of saying, hey, can we work things out? Can we talk? Can we? Yeah, there's enough in this world to so we work things out. Instead of that, no, we're going to show them how powerful we were, and we're going to get in there and do this kind of stuff before the Russians came in. So that was an ancillary factor. My position, and I think it's proven by people like Gar Alperovich, who wrote the book on this, it's that it was really Truman and Jimmy Burns saying, well, now, these people are the equivalent of camel jockeys and towel heads in Iraq later. They're gooks and they're Japanese and we hate them and we could do this kind of thing to them. So the parallel with what the head of the National Security Council of Ukraine said yesterday about Asians and how they lack humanity, it was just so striking to me. And it's not foreign at all to the ears of people in the White House who are, look at them. Well, I won't comment further.